Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our 7th episode of the Future Forward series. I'm Elisa Laurel, Program Manager with WRCOG. We will be starting shortly, so stay tuned. In the meantime, go ahead and use your phone to either scan the QR code, or you can go to slido.com. Again, that's slido.com, SLIDO.com, and then type in event code forward, spelled FORWARD, and the number 7. We'll be getting started shortly. Thank you for joining us today.
COVID-19 has been a catalyst for ideas, for innovation.
Our employers have to be flexible.
How do we build wealth at the individual level, communities that did not have that previously?
Every city in the world will need to get more sustainable.
Innovators, entrepreneurs aren't just born, they're cultivated.
Building fair and inclusive economies is a complicated process, and we will need to be vigilant as we move forward.
Good morning. My name is Elisa Laurel, Program Manager for the Western Riverside Council of Governments, otherwise known as WRCOG, and we are honored and excited you could join us for the 7th episode of our Future Forward series. I can't believe we're on our 7th episode. It just seems like yesterday that we started the series. So thank you for tuning in and sticking with us. So for any viewers that are new out there here at WRCOG, we serve as a regional agency that focuses on helping many of our cities and jurisdictions in the Western Riverside County subregion in the areas of transportation, planning, energy, environment, and conservation, just to name a few. Now, before we jump into our dynamic discussion today, I want to make sure that we thank our in-kind sponsors for sticking with us since the very beginning. A huge thank you to the Inland Empire Regional Chamber of Commerce and the Southern California Association of Governments. Thank you guys for continuing to promote the Future Forward series and sticking with us. So just as a friendly reminder, some of you may be new to the series. Some of you may be tuning in as regulars, but for those of you that are new, I do want to take a moment to give a couple housekeeping rules. So we take questions at the very, very end of the broadcast, but you can submit questions while the panel discussion is going on, and you simply do that by taking your cell phone, turning on the camera feature, or just scanning the QR code that appears in the corner of the screen. And you're going to go ahead and type in event code forward. That's FORWARD and the number 7. Again, FORWARD and the number 7. I don't think the event code is case sensitive, but if it is, try capital F or lowercase f just in case it's case sensitive, but we also should have some directions appearing in the corner of the screen as well. Now, if your camera's not working or it's not scanning the QR code, just make sure that you go to your browser and type in slido.com. Again, that's SLIDO.com, and then it'll ask for an event code, and that event code is #7. Also, I want to make sure that we give a shout out to making sure that you subscribe down below. Also like our videos. It helps us to understand what kind of content you guys are looking for. So hopefully today's broadcast is timely. As you can see, I am broadcasting from our home office here in our residence, and we've been transitioning back and forth to the office, but for the most part, I think we didn't realize how much the COVID-19 pandemic would impact our regular working culture. So I think this is going to be a really, really timely discussion for everyone tuning in today. We're going to be focusing on the future of the office and the impacts COVID-19 has had. It obviously has been quite unprecedented, and it's shifted many of society's behaviors and expectations. Many argue that the current climate is just society's new normal, and one of these shifts, of course, is the future of the office. And what will that look like? So do we need to keep an office? What will the world of the new office look like? How will it be reimagined? Those are just a few of the points that we'll be discussing today. And we're going to be joined by an esteemed panel of guests that I'm excited to share with you. Matt Horton from the Milken Institute, Amber Shiata, Senior Director with JLL, and then Ken Ryan with KTGY Architecture and Planning. So I'll be passing it off now to Matt Horton with the Milken Institute, who will be moderating our very, very timely discussion. So Matt, turning it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Horton. I'm Director at the Milken Institute Center for Regional Economics in California Center. Really happy to be here, and thanks to my friends at the Western Riverside Council of Governments for bringing me back to this conversation, which is really important, especially as we start to grapple with the immediate and lasting effects of the pandemic on our economy. I'm joined today by Ken Ryan, Principal at KTGY Architecture and Planning, and Amber Shiata, Senior Director of Research and Strategy of at JLL. And before we get started in our conversation, a bit of primer about what it is that we'll be talking about today, as looking at the demographics unfolding around the state, the impacts of the pandemic on our state and regional economies, and reflecting on the type of economy that we had post-COVID, and the lack of inclusivity and equity in different parts and specific segments, especially in vulnerable and minority communities. And as essential workers, predominantly from those vulnerable and minority communities, along with other segments, begin to grapple with increasingly priced out of housing, facing longer commutes, dependent on low-wage jobs, and different industries, limiting those opportunities in different parts around the state. We really look at the need to kickstart a recovery, one that's vibrant enough to reinvest in these communities and in different place-based strategies around the state. But how do we do that? And what are these forces that are plaguing some of this political coordination? And what kind of strategies can we identify that regional leaders, state leaders, and can collaborate with other philanthropic and industry leaders who all really want to take bold action to address these underlying inefficiencies. So I'll start with you, Amber, and you've really laid out some fantastic research here, but as less people going into the office impacts many different areas, particularly as it relates to transportation. What trends are you seeing since the proliferation of work from home because of the pandemic? And how has working from home impacted things like transit demand, which I think we can all guess? And what's some of the bigger picture elements that you're seeing from some of that research?
Right. So the whole pandemic has basically upended our worlds from whatever angle you look at it. And one of the things that I'm focused on is just the future of office. So what does the future of work look like? What does the future of office demand look like? And then to your questions, what does that mean for transit? Where does that mean for choices about where people live and where they commute and what kind of jobs they have? And all of that is now in question. When the pandemic struck, of course, stay-at-home orders were very important to try to mitigate the spread. And with that, the millions of people that work in offices were suddenly working from home. All of us are working from home today, for the most part, because those restrictions still haven't really been lifted. And so that really has companies thinking about, one, does this work from home experiment actually work? And we can talk about that a little bit. Some pros and cons for sure with working from home. Certainly a pro is that there are fewer people commuting, fewer, people in cars, less pollution. But what does that mean for our transit authorities, where we don't have a lot of people taking public transit right now because all of those people are working from home? Maybe not as big of an issue here in Southern California as it might be in a place like New York or the Bay Area, since transit use is much higher. But it's still something that, if you've got more people working from home in the future, post-pandemic, what does that mean in terms of some of those networks? Thinking about, working from home, working in the office, some people are thinking, where do I want to live? If I'm not commuting to downtown Los Angeles every day, or to Santa Monica every day, or to Irvine every day, do I really need to be living as close as I can to those places and paying higher rents or higher home prices? Maybe I can live further east, further inland, and have a much more affordable quality of life, especially if I plan to work from home for the foreseeable future, right? So these are all the things that people, I think workers are thinking about, companies are thinking about in terms of, what does our future demand for office space look like? If we can have more people working from home, do we need to have all of this office space that we're paying for that nobody's sitting in right now? So these are the kinds of trends that we're exploring right now, just to, predict where does this all go once the pandemic starts to lift.
Right. There's, I think we're all, set in on 8 months now or so of working from home, and maybe some of us getting a little bit more exasperated with that as the days goes on. But, in terms of those longer term trends setting in, and, is the office space over? What are some of the opportunities there, Ken, that you're seeing on the real estate side that kind of point the way on this short term to longer term effects of work from home on real estate demand and some of those forces taking shape?
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me today. Really enjoy it. I look at this conversation in the context of sort of three areas, and hopefully we can touch on all of this today. There's a physical planning side, there's a social side, and there's a technology side that all of us have become very aware of because we are all working from home right now. My sort of, contribution to this today, it comes from being an urban planner, being a private sector, business owner with my partners at KTGY, and also as a former mayor. So the comments will come from a perspective of planner, private sector, as well as public sector experience. I think when you start thinking about trends, first of all, if you ask the question, how's the working from home, experience, and what's under the context of how does that change offices in the future? I think there's three answers to that. If you ask Jack Dorsey, CEO of Twitter, he'll say, you know what, everybody can work from home from now on forever, all of my employees. You ask that same question to Reed Hastings of Netflix, and he thinks it's a total negative. I think it's somewhere in between, frankly. Our firm, I'll use KTGY just as an example. We, before COVID, we have offices across the country, and before COVID, we had about 50% of our employees could work from home, not full time, but have the capability of doing that. And we had a business plan in place that over the next 2 years, because of lifestyle and staff and who we're working with now, et cetera, we had a plan that in 2 years we would be 100% have capability, not full time, but capability of people being able to work from home. That obviously got condensed into a 2-week period like a lot of other businesses. Thank goodness for our IT people. But we've made it work. I think there's a couple of observations before you start thinking about what's the new office and what's planning going to do, relative to new office. One of them is we've made it work from an efficiency perspective and a performance perspective. My office is based here in Irvine. I live in Yorba Linda. I do work in LA County, Orange County, the Inland Empire. But some of a typical day might be you've got a meeting that's an hour and a half away. You drive to that meeting, you do your 1 or 2 hour meeting, you have lunch, then you drive back with traffic, and basically your entire day, you got the phone, but basically your entire day was going to one meeting. Now we do that in 1 hour. Although you don't get the same human side to it. So the technology side, this is kind of going back to the social, physical, and technology. It's great from a technology perspective. But you can't read body language. Even this today, we've got listeners, hopefully we've got some listeners today, that are here. You can't see whether you're putting them to sleep right now or not and read body language and that human experience. The same is true for our employees. You you can have a team meeting on Monday and do assignments and everybody does their work. You try to interact, and hopefully today we can talk about some techniques that we're using to inspire people and make that all work, and the performance is good. But in the long run, I think there are some real challenges with the creative culture side where you're not even hearing informal conversations in that whole work environment. So in terms of trends from an office perspective, we see it as not giving up real estate. We aren't going to, the easy answer to that is, gosh, if we're going to rotate and to have staff go back, we probably don't need as much space. We're not seeing that. All of our offices have opened around the country except in California. But what we're seeing is that we need to create better space for more collaborative, meetings, et cetera, private space, reconfigure it, make it attractive to go there. But we don't see ourselves giving up real estate. With that said, one last thought on your question. I do think there are some trends that we need to pay attention to. And Amber, is like on the cutting edge of this. More people are working at home. We were planning on that anyway. And I think in regards to that, in places like the Inland Empire and others, I think there's opportunity from a land planning perspective to maybe not create new office centers, but actually have some flexible land uses that allow for satellite offices or other space that respond to perhaps that need, that more people aren't going to all be driving to where all the offices are located. And that affects other services and other land uses as well.
That's a great point, Ken. And it reminds me, Amber, of a slide in your deck that you gave to SCAG a few weeks or months ago. Also reflects some research that the Institute has done on California's innovation-based economy. The slide I'm thinking of, Amber, is the center of the U.S. economy shifting westward over the past 30 years on some certain tech-driven clustering, and taking that kind of location quotient from a tech-based clustering. What's the opportunities, I think this question is to both of you, the opportunities there for capturing some of that tech-based economic development in more inland areas based on some of the trends that Ken was highlighting in ways that leverage land use, or some opportunities there for leaders to think about as we look at more dedicated strategies for business formation and post-pandemic economic development.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that, to your point, right, the economy has certainly shifted west, and what we found in this cycle, the Bay Area has become prohibitively expensive, and it's almost as though tech dug its own grave up there, because the success of that economy has created an economy that was unaffordable for a lot of people, and has now accelerated some decision making from some of this talent, where you're thinking, some of these folks are thinking, maybe I'll buy a house in Tahoe since I'll just, work from home forever. But I think for us in Southern California, I actually think there's an opportunity for some of that talent migration to be captured down here, because we have a great quality of life, more affordable housing, more land. So it's easier to, just the size of our economy offers opportunity. And so I think what you'll find is that as talent starts to make some of those decisions and starts to accelerate some of those decisions, because again, this pandemic really has been one where things have just been accelerated. Trends that we saw happening before the pandemic started were really just accelerated by the pandemic. And that includes home buying decisions, that includes the use of e-commerce. And think about how even just those two trends are upending our economy and location choice and things like that. So I think that for us, the opportunity is to create, communities that are attractive to that talent, because at the end of the day, the companies are going to be chasing the talent. The talent war has been real for the last 10 years, and highly skilled talent is highly coveted. So, if those high wage earners decide that they want to work remote or work in a place that has a higher quality of life or more space, place like Southern California, I think that it's on us and our communities to sort of build business centers that take advantage of that. I don't think that means that that's the end of the headquarters location. Downtown LA is certainly going to remain a center of business, just like San Francisco and Manhattan. But I think that what you'll find across the country is that distributed work that we started to see before the pandemic, where you had companies like Google and Facebook moving into places like Austin and Seattle, in Southern California, that will also start to accelerate, I think, following this trend, just because, the ability to work remote will enable that growth and will enable some of that saturation of skilled talent in some places where it really hadn't been before.
Well, I agree with that. If I could add something to that, Matt, I think, it's really funny. If this had all ended like in a 2 or 3 month period, I think we'd all be back in the office and it was just a temporary thing. And there we go. And I do agree with Amber saying that, it's accelerated a trend. That's a really good observation. We were seeing it happen anyway. But I do think, and not just COVID related only, but just sort of the human nature, we obviously the millennials make up most of our workforce, but as they start to grow and they have kids and they have dogs and all the things that impact Zoom meetings, et cetera, we've learned to work with that. People are looking for space and are looking for affordability. So it's accelerated us on the land planning side as well as the architecture side to figure out at home, how can we build, the big challenge still is, how can you build a small house that's affordable, that also now maybe has some private workspace, maybe in the master bedroom or something, you give up something to actually have a private space where you could do these kind of calls. I think that's changed and accelerated the way we're looking at things. We had one question when we all got ready to go back to and open up our offices across the country. All the partners asked for staff, look, we're not going to mandate it. You got to be safe. It's voluntary. That's been occurring. The number one question that came back was, okay, if it's my day to go in the office, do I have to go in the office? So we know people have figured it out and are comfortable with it. So that's part of the influence on the social side that's changing, not just the physicality of the workspace, but we need amenities to make it, that whole culture side to make you want to come back to the office. And I see a combination of that. I also think it might be this opportunity that Amber's talking about is in perhaps places that you don't even think about. And I think this is even to a certain extent in the Inland Empire. And that's why we're trying to incorporate some flexible zones in our green community planning that we're doing that would allow for a response to this. Because I think people are looking for affordability. And for those listening, if you haven't Googled it, they used to be boom towns, now we're calling them Zoom towns. And so are there areas that maybe I would like to work here, but I need some other services that are nearby and stuff. So it is starting to influence our land planning in a way. And one last thought, I also think you can't overreact to it. I think it's a trend, just like Amber was saying, that has been accelerated. But the knee-jerk reaction is like, hey, we don't need as much office space in Irvine anymore. We can cut a deal and cut that in half. And I don't think that's the case. I'm a glass half full guy, and I'm hoping that in 2 years from now, we're having these conversations. Hey, remember when we all had to wear masks and everybody was stocking up on toilet paper and stuff? We do have a short memory in terms of the human sort of mindset. And so I think there's a balance there in terms of, the future workspace and how we're dealing with that.
Yeah,
and
I totally agree.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I totally agree. I mean, if you look at even surveys and dozens of, surveys have been conducted this summer with office employees, saying, do you need to go back to the office? Do you want to go back to the office? And overwhelmingly, people do want to actually get back to the office. And what they miss the most is the socializing and the collaboration that they get from their colleagues. And those are soft skills that you can't build upon, right? And you think about all of us who've worked in offices before, we have the culture bank built with the colleagues that we've worked with, right? New people, young people, virtual onboarding, all of that is doesn't create strong business growth. You need to have that soft touch, right?
And I think that's true in every business, but particularly in ours. We have a lot of right brain. This is a creative culture business. We're architects and planners. And, you do a team meeting on Monday and give everybody their assignments. And of course, they're working. You try to interact. There's a lot of techniques that we're all using to, stay connected. I think it is not the same, though, and in the short term, we've made it work. But in the long run, that growth and that culture and that whole human experience, you miss it. So I think there's a balance there that has to be recovered.
Yeah, I think you both really hit on a really underlying core conversation here about just the way we approach urban design and land use. So along with recalibrated economic development and what the future of the office physically is going to look like, how do we really accommodate a more adaptable urban form? What steps do you think we need to take at a regional leadership level to kind of embrace that non-binary solution?
Well, that's a great question. Yeah, I'll jump in if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
I think it's a combination of things. I think this probably gets back to the glass half full. There are some positives that have come out of this actually that have also accelerated trends. Cities had to figure out how to, especially if there's any council members or decision makers today joining us, how to figure out how to help their businesses stay afloat. Well, some of those reactions are really positive ones. Maybe we shouldn't drive every land use decision based on the car. What if we opened up some streets and we had outdoor dining in our downtown and we created space where people feel comfortable and there's some music and entertainment and we're smart social, distancing wise, et cetera. And so you're seeing some pretty strong opportunities. I have a client, Brewery X. They are a cool brewery in Anaheim that had 60,000 square feet of indoor space, couldn't use it. In this case, Anaheim really worked with us very, very well on not going through, this is a long answer to your question, not going through a whole big process in CUP and Planning Commission, City Council. If it was within reason, their emergency ordinance let us go behind the building. So we now have an outdoor space that is temporary, but we designed it to look like you want to be there. That used to be parking lot, which is now an outdoor experience for 326 people behind their building. And you're seeing a lot of other communities, downtowns close downtown streets and create a pedestrian environment. I think those are some healthy things that have occurred that actually are in response to the COVID issue.
And things that got pushed back in the past too.
Yeah, they always, oh no, we can't do that. So I think there's some good trends that have occurred there that can be elevated and be better. I also think, and they're not just temporary. You maybe think about how you've made it work permanently. I think there are some land use recommendations, both in urban infill and in new community planning, where we've tried to, we don't pretend to know it all. I think in some cases you've maybe adopt some flex zones and some flex uses that allow for, how much, do we listen, how much the data that Amber is sharing with us, becomes reality in terms of, perhaps office or other services and things. So we've tried to have some, what we're calling flex zones that get incorporated in some future planning and don't nail it down like, everything that's going to get built necessarily. And then lastly, regional agencies and some communities have done a really good job of this in the short term. Process is everything. On the private sector side, timing and getting through the process and all of that is more important than anything else usually. And so if there are some streamlining processes that public agencies have learned to incorporate to help respond to this sort of short-term urgent need, if some of those could get memorialized in terms of the long term, it would help actually communities that heretofore, as I don't want to go there, it's going to take 2 years to get through the process. If there are some procedures that have been put in place that could be incorporated into the long term, I think that's a benefit too.
Well, you think about, just to add to your point, thinking about land use and even the built environment as it exists today, you think about, hotels are not doing so great right now, and that's a huge problem. But the way that work has changed in the last 10 years and the need for the third space, it's not just the home office or the office or the WeWork, right? Maybe it's a hotel lobby, or maybe it's a outdoor cafe or a promenade that you can work from, right? And I think that there could be some really imaginative reuses and repurposing of some of those spaces.
Sorry, this is my planner wonk hat, but before the COVID, you do all this research of what people are looking for. The number one amenity that people are looking for, especially right now, is outdoor space and exercise and walking. I think that's even accelerated also, to use Amber's terms, the trend is accelerated with COVID. It's like, I want to be outside. I'm cooped up in my, kid's former office in my house, and I want to, get outside. I actually get excited when it's time to just go to the gas station or something, but trails and open space and those outdoor spaces where you can have social interaction and not feel like you have to wear a mask because I'm far enough away have been really strong, or have been, emphasized even more as positive amenities to incorporate into the land plan.
Yeah, you said something, Ken, there about being outside and accommodating for masks and maybe capturing some of that value, but from a planning and a trends side, especially on the public health, how much of these accommodations or stopgaps that we're implementing now, you think, especially on the public health side, are with us now in terms of what we'll have to account for in terms of the public health side of just how COVID has upended everything for the past, for the better part of this year?
Well, I promised myself I'd stay out of politics with this, but but as a former mayor, how can you not do that? No matter where you're coming from a political perspective, this has, as you know, and you know, it's a virus. But if you put away the politics just for a second and look at the pure data, I think a lot of it is here to stay, regardless of whether you look at the pure data. And it's sort of the wave of the future. And maybe it's not a bad thing. You go to the gas station and you grab the pump and you do the numbers, and now there's a cleansing device where you can wash your hands right over. So those are not bad things to actually have in public spaces, not just for COVID-19, but other diseases and things. So I think there are a lot of lasting health improvements that aren't going to go away. Part of it also is, I think, because it's just been beaten down to us. You go on, TV right now, and you can see how many, what the current death toll is. So I think there's a balance there. I think some of the things that we're experiencing aren't going to go away, and they're here to stay. And then maybe some of the other ones soften a bit in terms of what we need to do as we continue to get smarter about it, and as a vaccine rolls out. And hopefully 24 months from now, everybody's feeling more comfortable.
And therapeutics, I guess. I think the other side of that, Amber, is different generations that have maybe accommodated or adapted to this new reality. I mean, are you seeing noted very much differences in the way that different cohorts are adapting to work from home, or are we interpreting any kind of immediate policy implications or good insights from some of that generational shifts?
Yeah, well, if you look at so going back to the employee surveys that I mentioned earlier, if you look at how that breaks down by age, it's actually the millennial and the Gen X groups who are desiring to get back to the office more so than any other group. Millennials, maybe not a surprise, because the oldest millennials are 38, 39, the youngest are in their mid-20s. And so you think about just career growth and the opportunities that come through interfacing with senior leadership and how those are being missed out on right now. That's the number one thing that younger employees have cited as something that they would like to go back to the office to do, other than socializing and collaborating. So I think that, as far as the generational divide, the other, you're looking at the other end of the spectrum, I think, older employees on survey results have said that, they do want to go back to the office as well, but it doesn't seem to be as much of, that share isn't as high as the millennial share. So I think that also speaks to sort of where some of those older employees are in their lives, right? They maybe have a vacation home that they can go quarantine in. So whereas a lot of millennials and Gen Xers, if they're living in Manhattan or San Francisco, they're in a really tiny urban apartment and they can't do anything. So the playground that used to surround them is now closed. And now they're in this, little cubicle of their own, where they live and they eat. And it's not good.
So maybe not so much generational, but more about access and equity, like who
has.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, the haves and the have-nots, I think, is probably one of the more important things to point out here, because you think about the impact that this recession has had on employment, and it markedly is impacting low-wage earners than it is high-skilled workers who are on salaries, right? And you think about some of the confounding data points that we're seeing come in, where home prices are up 12, 15% year over year in Southern California. Inventory is at an all-time low. Who are the people buying those homes? People who didn't lose their jobs, people who are making, who are still working in offices, even though they're working remote. So I think that it is uncovering some of those inequities, and some economists have sort of called it a K-shaped recovery, where you've got the haves sort of picking up steam. Retail spending is back to where it was before the pandemic, which is surprising to some people. And then you have the other side of the K, folks who are still working, using the last of their unemployment benefits, hoping that they won't get evicted at the end of January. And that's a really harsh reality.
I just want to add something, Amber. I agree with what your observations are. I think people, our workforce is millennials for the most part, so it's not 100%, but the lion's share of our employees are millennials, and
some Xers.
Yeah, and some Xers, for sure, Xers too. I would throw them in that same batch. People need to grow to be fulfilled. You know, success is divine, you know, progress is fulfillment, not necessarily success. And I think that's a big part of it. And they see that they're missing that. I also have some fun with this, and I think there's some truth to it. Those folks also are the ones that do have 2 dogs and a couple of kids and maybe another one on the way, and they're already in a smaller space because they wish that they had maybe a little bit more space, but it's too much money. And so I think part of getting back to work also is like, maybe I don't want to go back 100%, but at least 1 or 2 or 3 days just to get in the office so I can like sort of think, you know, and do a little bit better work. I think that's a little part of it. And then the last part, I have to laugh, you guys. I'm a baby boomer. Your point is really true. I actually was in Kona, and I know that I had a project in Orange with a design review committee. Normally it's buttoned up, you know, at least you've got this on you, maybe a tie. And I've known them for a long time. So I started off the meeting. It was one of these meetings where they're all on the Zoom, you can't see anybody. And I started the meeting off, you know, how's everybody doing? I said, you know, if somebody had told me that I would be at a DRC meeting from Kona, you know, wearing my shorts and a Hawaiian t-shirt doing the public hearing, I would have told them you were crazy a year and a half ago. But so there are some perks, you know, about the remote workforce, and we're all comfortable with using the technology. But I don't think you can't not go back to the office in terms of people growing and learning.
Yeah. Well, maybe the good thing about this is we'll finally know when a meeting should have been an email and an in-person conference should have been a Zoom call. Like there's this whole.
For guys like me, I actually know what Zoom and Life Size and GoTo and all that is now. You just walk in and it just sort of happened magically. Now we've had to get, you know, good with it.
That sounds like a book opportunity for you. We finally know when an email, when a meeting could have been an email.
Exactly.
You know, but kind of circling back to some of those underlying equity issues, you know, we all know that the state has a very escalating housing development imbalance, especially at affordable and workforce housing levels.
Yeah.
I think that's a part of this conversation in terms of longer term thinking. You know, if you're on the coast or more coastal, you either need to bring more housing to jobs, and more inland, we need to bring jobs to housing, and maybe a little bit of both. So, you know, looking at those shifts, or maybe looking at a new opportunity to have a more nuanced conversation about the need for more housing supply at specific levels, especially inland, to support talent development or talent relocation. You know, what are some of those opportunity areas that we might look at, or some of the data that's telling us what specific needs to hone in on? Like, how do we have this more housing conversation as a economic recovery catalyst?
Well, I think what's interesting, I'll start with that, you know, with housing, right? There's always been this battle between, we need more housing in California, which nobody would disagree with. But the challenge has been, where do we build it? And I think that if you're thinking about sustainability and, you know, dense urban environments, there's the philosophy that building in an urban environment is actually more sustainable because people aren't driving as much, they're doing everything, you know, in town. But now that's sort of been upended. And I think that we don't, you know, I wouldn't say I know the answer yet, because now you've got the question of, you know, if people aren't working downtown every day, then maybe they don't need to live downtown. And maybe this sort of helps with that housing challenge, where you can say, like, we should just build it wherever we can, because now people can live wherever they want. They'll still be going to the office maybe once or twice or 3 times a week, if at all, but some jobs, you know, can be fully remote. And I think that there's maybe an opportunity there to, you know, play into that as we think about developing more housing and where those housing developments are.
I think I couldn't agree more with that too. I think we don't know how. I think the big question is how much, but I think there's opportunity from a development perspective, a land planning perspective, and from a community policy perspective of getting away from the mindset. We were sort of being forced to do this through the RENA numbers and sort of the state telling you. But I think because of these trends being accelerated, I think there's more than ever an opportunity to think about new communities in the outlying areas that historically have been done just because we need an affordable place to live. And then I would drive for an hour and a half to Irvine or wherever it is, you know, to the urban center to work. I think there's a big opportunity to get away from that a little bit and come back to the more fundamentals about, you know, great neighborhoods and what they really mean. And it's not just affordable housing, it's, you know, places for employment and retail and socialization and art, you know, and other cultural opportunities. And I think there's what's really going to be fun over the next several years is looking at how much and what can you actually offer, because you've got a larger population that necessarily doesn't think anymore that I have to be in the urban center to be cool and hip and have all these activities going on. And so I think there's trends there that from an urban design land planning perspective and a policy perspective that we really want to take advantage of, and not just be building cheap houses out in the outlying areas.
Right.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Amber.
Oh, I was just going to say, just thinking about, we don't have a lot of data points yet, and we don't have a lot of migration data yet because this pandemic's only been going for 7 months. But what we do have are data points on rents for apartments. And if you look at suburban versus urban apartment rents have been declining month over month for the last 6 months because people are leaving. But suburban rents, on the other hand, across the country, you're seeing a month over month increase consistently these last 6 months because there's, people are seeking more space. It's cheaper and there's more space in suburban apartments. So.
The one thing in this conversation I've been intrigued by lately is this talk of the 15-minute city, how things are, basic amenities and leisure and access to work is, within a 15 or, some kind of proximity. Are strategies like this, kind of emerging as the dominant new thinking from a bridge from our past sustainable communities or more resiliency dominated state planning exercises?
I think it's both. That's a really good question, Matt. I don't pretend to have that answer to that, but I think it's a little of both. I think sustainability is still there, trying to minimize your drive time. But I do think that some of this work from home is changing that mindset a little bit in terms of the services that need to go along with it. It's one of the reasons right now that I opened up the conversation saying in some of our land planning, we're doing the things we really know for sure, and then there's some flex zones. And so that's where cities and agencies can come into play also. It gives us a certain amount of flexibility. We're trying to capitalize on some of the strong indicators about where our future goes in terms of communities that maybe aren't in traditional office urban centers, like taking advantage of medical and hospitals and some of those types of developments, and then not just doing a hospital, but actually building uses around that to sort of complement it so that there is employment. Yeah. And so those are areas that in a lot of cases we're starting to identify as flex zone that doesn't pretend that we have all those answers, but you want to have a certain amount of flexibility that would entice the development community to come into those places and provide some of the services that maybe in the past you wouldn't think would be part of that thought process based on where it's located.
Yeah, I think as far as services go, and I may be thinking very tactically here, but one of the number one things that I think any community needs to think about is the connectivity to the internet and what kind of services are available, because I know that is, for the most part, Southern California is very well covered, but there are certain emerging communities that I think probably not as well connected, and that's tough if we've got people working from home.
Yeah, I'll also say too, and my architect partners are really focused on that, and we have been for some time. It's just been accelerated, as Amber said, is figuring out affordability and attainability, and not just the rental property, but the home purchase, and what does that new house look like, and do you have to have a garage for every house? There's ways that we've been really trying to find that balance between mandated legislation that makes a house cost more money, but at the same time being able to make it affordable to those home buyers that are looking for affordability. There's a delta there somewhere.
As we transition here close to final thoughts and insights, Amber, you have another great slide here about the surge in e-commerce, and all of this, whether it's a recalibrated economic development conversation or housing or infrastructure, especially on broadband, the topic of funding is going to be raised, whether at local or regional state levels. Do you think that these trends in e-commerce sales are things, maybe not to add to the growing list of taxes at different levels, but do you think this is a place for state policy leaders to look at as some type of new revenue source, or maybe think about recalibrating the way that our revenue flow works, and from what source?
Absolutely. I love that you brought up e-commerce. I know that we're talking about the future of work today, but really it's the topic could be, what has COVID done to our economy? And e-commerce is another big thing to watch, because you've got a 40% increase in e-commerce sales this year. Just because, again, we've accelerated that trend. It was a trend that was already picking up, but all of a sudden, when you've got a bunch of people at home who can't go shopping, who still need groceries, now you've got a whole new segment of the market who will be using online shopping to get their goods, right? And so that has totally upended the retail industry, and it was already something that was going through that transition, but again, we've accelerated that. And it isn't just the Amazons of the world, it's really any retailer who's trying to reach their consumers looking at, how do I build an e-commerce model that is effective and cost effective as well. And so with that, you think about revenue streams, I think there's absolutely an opportunity for California or for counties and cities within California even to put some more clarity around where those tax revenues come from and how they gain access to them. Because I know right now it isn't very clear. It's clear as mud. I think Bradley Burns, the tax regulation in California, that, you can, a certain share goes to the communities, but I think that the communities have to petition for that, and there's some process. Anyways, it's not very clear, and it's not very easy to figure out. And I think that with retail centers not being, we're definitely over retailed in this country, and we're starting to see what that feels like. But on the flip side, you've got retailers like Target and Amazon who are using some of their brick and mortar stores to help with those distribution fulfillment needs, right? And so I think that, again, understanding for community leaders, understanding that the nature of retail is changing, that those sales tax revenues that you could have expected through brick and mortar in the past may not be the stream in which you get them from now. And so figuring out, how do we sort of capture some of those e-commerce sales and the revenues that come with that, that's, I think, going to be the question, especially as we start to fund, all the services and what, have you that come with that kind of growth.
I think that's great. I think that's great insight and potential next steps for an assembly of leaders at different capacities to think about, especially as the fallout from the pandemic may have opened up more acceptability on those topics, and maybe not they're so third rail. Ken, do you have any final thoughts? Or I know you had the 3 areas that you wanted to cover today. How do you think we did?
I enjoy the conversation. I think there's I guess my final thought would be, it's complex. There's a human social side that we've touched on today that I think is really important, a demographic side, an affordability side, the technology side, and then you sort of try to memorialize that and don't overreact, but provide flexibility in terms of the planning and policy side. And that'd probably be my parting thoughts. Try to take some of the positives out of this and turn that into opportunities, and I think there are those that are out there, and particularly in some areas of communities that maybe heretofore didn't see it that way. So those are my sort of final thoughts.
Well, I thank you both for your time and participation here. I really enjoyed our conversations. Hope we can continue them, socially distant or maybe in person, hopefully soon. I thank you again, and I'll turn it back to our hosts for questions from the audience. And thanks again.
Thanks for hosting us.
Yeah, thanks. That was great.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you to our esteemed panel of experts today. So I think it's safe to say that the office is not going away. So now I just want to remind everyone that please be sure to scan the QR code that appears in the corner of the screen, and you can submit your questions or go to slido.com, that's spelled SLIDO.com, and enter the code FORWARD, FORWARD, and the number 7. You can also access JLL's interesting report on the future of the office by it's in the description box down below of this YouTube link, and an email was sent out to all of the registrants earlier this morning as well too, and we'll be sending follow-up information where it should be included in there as well. I'm going to be handing it off now to Rachel, who will be doing our Q&A with our panelists. So I know we'll probably be having a lot of questions coming in for a great panel of speakers. So make sure you go to slido.com so you are not last to submit a question. But before we get started with our questions, we're going to go ahead and highlight one of WRCOG's programs, Western Community Energy, otherwise known as WCE. So take a look.
This year has brought many difficult changes, from the way we work, the way we learn, and even how we connect with one another. It's up to us as a community to support local businesses, empower education, and help those of us who may be struggling. This is what Powered by the Community means. Western Community Energy works with residents and businesses to save money and support those who power us. Western Community Energy, powered by the community.
Awesome. Well, thank you all who have tuned in with us today, and a big thank you to our featured guest speakers. We're going to jump into the live Q&A portion, so be sure to submit your questions on slido.com using the code FORWARD7. So again, thank you guys so much for being a part of our conversation. We're going to kick off the live Q&A portion with our very first question, and I think this is probably going to be best suited for Amber. And so Amber, could you maybe talk about this question? So about the business and cost side for organizations, what guidance do you have for an organization that just signed a long-term lease for new corporate space and then COVID? What would you say to that?
Well, first, I would say that's probably a really good business decision because COVID, we all hope, will only last for the next, year or so once there's a vaccine and everybody's got it. And I think what's really important to remember is that people, the nature of work really does, require people work together for really strong connections, and collaboration. All of that requires a home base. The office is the natural home base. I think that what we'll find happens in the future is that the nature of work and the idea of the office will be more flexible, but there will still be this need to have that place to work and to meet and to collaborate. I think that there will be some lasting effects given how we've all been working from home, and that seems to be working, but it's not 100% perfect. And there are a lot of challenges with that as well. And so I think that in the long term, having a corporate space or having an office where all of your employees can congregate is really smart.
Mm-hmm. It's more of the cultural aspect of the dynamic of the office for sure. And I think that leads into the next question that we've received from the audience. So someone said that it seems like the very nature of work has changed, certainly as it pertains to culture, how we have meetings, our expectations for interactions with colleagues and others, the meaning of work. So can one of you talk about best cultural practices from a management perspective?
Sure, I can jump in on that. I think it's sort of true anyway, but more than ever, because you're working from home and we're communicating on Zoom, I think communication and leadership is key. And so, kind of all those great principles of good leadership, of integrity, enthusiasm, desire, sense of purpose, somehow that needs to get communicated and not just told, what to do. So we've incorporated a lot of the technology to help facilitate that. So our Connect posts, sharing information, sharing successes with projects, actually sharing fun things, there's a Halloween party coming up or whatever, to try to personalize and connect, I think is really key. That's always sort of key anyway, but now more than ever. We did, for those whoever asked that question, how do you figure that out? We did surveys pretty early on and actually followed up surveys. I think a big part of that connection and inspiring staff in particular is that, there's action and that some of the information that I share actually gets implemented and embraced. So I think there's a number of techniques that you can use. We also set up some committees, not just to do this, but actually to help our firm grow and get smarter about what are things that we should be working on, our R&D committee and others, to help empower our staff and make us feel more connected. So we've been trying to use the technology. I tip my hat to my IT folks again to actually help facilitate that, since we're not all in the same room.
Mm-hmm,
Rachel,
definitely.
I think one point I'd add into there is, from a public policy perspective, if we really want to encourage people or incentivize people or facilitate people getting back into the office on some level in the immediate to short term and longer term, is childcare. I think we really have to think about how we allow people to have families and cost of living challenges associated with childcare and the challenges parents face now. I think COVID has really shined a light on the childcare issue locally, national policy things, and finding solutions to lower cost of childcare. I think can really be a huge impetus to getting people back into the office.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with that too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's really interesting just seeing the extent to which COVID has impacted even the day-to-day functions of what does it look like for childcare? What does it look like when we're doing X function that was totally normal in a traditional work environment? So that leads into the next question actually quite well. And so someone is hoping that, let's see, it says, can the panel provide some thoughts related to successful onboarding of new office staff in the current environment? If we do end up with an increase in virtual staffing, how should we change our onboarding procedures for that environment? Matt, do you think you can maybe talk about some best practices either the Milken Institute has instituted or other best practices you've seen?
Yeah, I think I can only speak, anecdotally from what I've heard and read about back to office plans and things like that. But again, I think this is a bridge conversation between the immediate impacts of COVID versus the long-term effects and long-term cultural changes from a public health standpoint. I think Rachel touched on this earlier in her first question, but virtual meetings, onboarding in the short term to immediate term, even one-on-one meetings with new staff. I think those are all like in our year 12, 14-month window. But longer term, I think vulnerable populations, we're going to have a stronger account for at-risk populations and illnesses and a return to office or an office strategy that is designed more around some of those public health outcomes is probably here to stay, but I can't speak with certainty really around that.
I agree with that, Matt, actually. And I think the short term versus the long term focus is really what we're talking about here, right? Because, we all hope that COVID goes away, but I think what it's brought to the surface is that companies need to figure out what their plan is if this happens again. And we know that a pandemic is now possible, and we know kind of how that plays out. And I would hope that we would learn from some of those experiences this year, and corporate office users, they're learning just along with everybody else, and nobody really has the answer. But I think that through this last year, we found that, okay, if this happens again, these are some of the strategies that we can employ, whether it's onboarding, whether it's training, whether it's collaborating on work or using technologies to make sure that work continues. All of that is something that now companies are contending with.
Yeah, I think on some level there, HR has immediately become your public health officer as well.
Yep.
Yeah, the responsibilities of HR departments and IT departments in this time has really evolved, as all of our roles have.
And maintenance. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the next question. Oh, go ahead, Ken. Did you have something to add to that?
No, I was just saying I agree with those comments.
Mm-hmm. So the next question is more pertaining to Amber and the JLL study. So it says, what does the survey data tell us about worker bees at the administrative level, not the coders and managers, but rather those at the lower level of the organization?
Yeah, so the survey that we conducted was put out to all levels of employees in the corporations that we work with. So it was a pretty general survey. But there's actually been a lot of surveys conducted by a number of firms this summer. I think everybody's trying to figure out what is it that the worker wants, and what does the office or what does work mean to them. And I think that, kind of depending on how those surveys were conducted, you come up with a number of different insights. I think for the worker bees and some of the surveys I've seen, and thinking, I guess I would categorize worker bees as probably administrative professionals, finance professionals, HR professionals, perhaps. I think if you look at it based on, thinking about our major region here in Southern California, it's very expensive to live in the more dense urban environments, right? And so a lot of those worker bees tend to live a little further out from the corporate headquarters, and where cost of living is a little bit lower, where housing is a little bit more affordable. For those employees in particular, they have been very happy to have no commute, because think about some of those commutes, right? If you're commuting from the San Fernando Valley to downtown LA or even Santa Monica, or somewhere in Riverside to Irvine, I mean, that's a really long commute every single day. And so I think that what some of those surveys have highlighted is that having the ability to save time on the commute, spend more time with family, even though everybody's at home all the time now, so I guess there's pros and cons, but there is certainly some productivity to be gained from that. And I think HR professionals and corporate real estate professionals are thinking about that, because the long-term stickiness of this, going back to the short-term and long-term, is the question of how much space do I really need, and how many people are actually going to be coming back. And part of that is a balance between workers that want to come back and workers that want to continue to save on that commute. And it really is kind of a personal choice, because at the end of the day, what we found is largely people like to work with their colleagues. They want to be in the same place, but maybe they don't want to be there every single day for the long term. So we'll see how that plays out with commute patterns.
Yeah, about a month into this, my wife said, "When are you going back to work?" I actually think that, we've talked a lot about culture and growth and all that. The only thing I would add is something you mentioned, Amber. There's some truth to that. The staff that has 2 dogs and a couple of kids in a small living environment, it's been really hard. So to a certain extent, I think there is a pretty significant desire to, let me go back to work at least 3 days a week, and kind of get my work-life balance back. Maybe work at home a couple of days. One other thing, I don't think we mentioned this earlier, that I think is important too. The type of work you do it's not all universal. For us, for example, I've got writers, people do need quiet time, even myself. I mean, I can see in the future, yeah, it'd be great to have 1 or 2 days at home when you don't have all the distractions going on. I think, so depending on your business, I think part of that enters into the equation as well.
Yeah, and that's a good point too. I mean, you think about, worker bees, or however you want to categorize people, it's really just a categorization of creative workers versus sort of traditional workers, and the kind of function that you serve, or kind of work that you're doing, really sort of reflects your need and desire to get back to the office. And for me, I've actually gone back to the office a few times since September, and we've got very strict protocols in place, of course, but it's just nice to have a change of scenery. I don't know about everyone else, but I'm actually tired of just being at home all the time. So
Totally.
That's definitely true.
Absolutely.
So kind of rounding out our live Q&A time, I want to highlight one last question that we received from the audience. And as a side note, if you did submit a question and we didn't get to it, I'm going to connect with all of our speakers after the presentation, and we'll be able to distribute the answers to those questions when the final webinar is kind of packaged up. So the last question is, what is the #1 thing that all cities should be doing today to prepare for the future of the office? Who'd like to start us off?
Say that again. Say that again.
Yeah, what is the #1 thing that all cities should do today to prepare for the future of the office?
That's a really big question.
It is a big question.
So I'll start.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, this is to my bias though, but I think, look at what talent's doing, and look at what sort of those migration patterns might look like following COVID, because I think what's happening right now is you've got cheap money and people who are, who do still have jobs, who are looking at their situation and thinking, maybe I could move somewhere else if I'm not going to be going to the office every day. And I think that's the #1 question for me, is how does this sort of flesh out in terms of migration patterns and choice? And that is the talent question, which I think predicts the future of office in any market.
I would jump in and that's a great last question, and go back to sort of some of the thoughts we had very early on from a city's perspective. I think there's some physical things that you can do from a land plan perspective. I think there are some social things that you can do that we talked about in terms of dealing with your employees, et cetera. I think there's some things that you can do from a technology perspective that we've all gotten good at, through this, and incorporate that. Don't forget it and leave it away. Let's pretend COVID went away. I think you want to embrace that. And I also want to reemphasize there are some process things that cities can do that, just because it was temporary, if it worked, why go back to the old process? If you can do some things to accelerate approvals and processing in your city, I would continue to embrace them. And I would say, don't overreact, but also don't be too shy. I love the Wayne Gretzky quote, that you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Take some shots and move forward. Yeah. So that's a part I would share too with cities.
Yeah, Rachel, I would say, invest in the long-term benefits of a robust talent pipeline that can incubate, a broader economic recovery. We talked a little bit earlier in the panel about the 15-minute city. I think that can apply even in the suburbs in terms of amenities and access. So invest in access and inclusion, and I think you'll end up with a more resilient economic future.
I like that. Invest in those things for sure. That is definitely the way to create a diverse, healthy, resilient economy.
Definitely. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much again for taking the time to participate on our panel today. I'm going to tee it back off to Elisa to kind of close us out. So Elisa, back to you.
Thank you, Rachel, and our esteemed panel for today's timely and relevant discussion. And thank you to our viewers out there for continuing to tune in to our Future Forward series and to this episode in particular. So if you're new to our channel, again, just make sure that you subscribe down below and you hit the like button if you like this episode and the content that we featured. Now, before we sign off, we look forward to seeing you at our next broadcast. Our next broadcast is actually not going to be in November due to the Thanksgiving holiday. So we're going to be broadcasting early in December. So that's going to be on December 3rd from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. due to the Thanksgiving holiday. We will be getting the registration page out to you guys soon, so stay tuned for those exciting details. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and see you then. Bye.